Hello! In the South Pacific Ocean, a mysterious island lies behind a thunderstorm front. Sailors have been avoiding it for centuries, and planes flying over it would crash. At the height of the Cold War, the US government funds a research expedition to the isolated island to get to its hidden resources before the Soviet Union, whose satellites are about to discover the land. The expedition is led by Randa, who assembles a team and organizes a military escort. Upon arrival on the island, it's revealed that the geological reconnaissance is merely a cover. In fact, Randa has assembled his team to awaken the giant Kong and bring proof of the existence of monsters. In addition, it turns out that the other members of the expedition are not that simple either. Each of them went to the island for their personal gain. But will outsiders get what they want on the deadly island? 1944. Somewhere in the South Pacific, two warplanes crash on an unknown island. The surviving pilots continue the battle on the ground. After crossing the sandy shore, the opponents disappear into the jungle and continue their desperate fight. Hank Marlowe is on the verge of being killed by the cold weapon of his mortal enemy when the soldiers suddenly face a common threat. Following the powerful hands appears the huge face of the ancient giant Kong, threatening to destroy the uninvited guests of the Lost Island. 1973. The US is fighting the Vietnam War and the Cold War with the USSR, and the streets of Washington, D.C. are flooded with crowds of protesters. At this difficult time for the US government, geologist Bill Randa arrives at the senator's office, demanding an emergency meeting. As luck would have it, Bill manages to catch Al before he leaves for another appointment. The man briefly explains the reason for the meeting and shows a satellite image of an unknown island in the South Pacific, which is not on the maps. Legends of various nations refer to it as the Skull Island. Bill suggests that the island may have a unique, unknown ecosystem, and that an expedition to explore the resources of the Uncharted territory should be funded. The prospect of investing in this project seems untimely to the senator, and Al hurriedly leaves the office. Nonetheless, Randa continues to pester him and reveals an ace up his sleeve. It turns out that a Soviet satellite will pass over the area tomorrow, and the enemy may start exploring the territory and its resources before them. This fact convinces the senator, and he grants permission to equip the expedition. An expedition with military escort departs from Vietnam. The military unit is led by Colonel Preston Packard, who's been having a difficult time dealing with the country's defeat in the war. His squad was supposed to be sent back home, but under the general's orders, the fighters must complete one last mission. Bill and his assistants look for another potential member of the group in Saigon. The man comes to meet James Conrad, a professional pathfinder for the British Secret Services, who can navigate the jungle impeccably, but now lives his life aimlessly on the brink of poverty. Despite the many obvious dangers of the uncharted tropics, and the lack of a map of the area they will be exploring, Conrad agrees to lead the expedition and go with the group for a hefty reward and a bonus if they return alive. At the same time, an invitation to the cartographic expedition and the coordinates of the group's gathering place are received by a famous anti-war photographer, a girl named Mason, who is aiming for the Pulitzer Prize. The following evening, in the harbor of Bangkok, the expedition members are boarding a ship. Geological exploration specialist Brooks explains their intended activities on the island. Thanks to Colonel Packard's helicopters, the geologists plan to drop seismic missiles on the island, and the vibrations from their explosions are meant to help map the island's underground caverns. And to explore potential terrestrial resources, the team will move through the area under Mr. Conrad's direction. The ship is approaching the island's storm veil, which looks far more threatening up close than on the satellite imagery. The head of the field research team demands that the expedition be canceled because of the threat to the lives of all its participants. The decision to continue the operation is now up to the colonel, whose helicopters must make their way through the coastal storm, and Packard fearlessly takes the machines into the sky, not wanting to return home without a victory. The colonel's risk turns out to be worth it. The group successfully breaks through the raging clouds, and the explorers see the pristine beauty of the mysterious island. The scientists begin the mission. Several aircraft with a team of field explorers land in the open, while the others set off to drop seismic charges. The island is shaken by a series of devastating explosions. The pilots of the expedition are enjoying the thrill of action, when suddenly one of the choppers gets hit by a palm tree flying through the air. The helicopter crashes, and the other aircraft is attacked by the huge hands of the ancient giant Kong. The behemoth appears before the group of explorers who have invaded its territory. Under the command of the colonel, they surround the monster and open fire, but the bullets do not harm the ferocious giant, and Kong continues to destroy the attacking choppers. Packard's helicopter crashes as well, but the colonel manages to stay alive, unlike his partner. Once again in a real battle, the soldier is determined to win and, this time, destroy the enemy. After the first encounter with Kong, no helicopter remains in the air. Survivors of the crash gather in ground groups. Conrad and Mason find themselves on the south side of the island. The professional tracker intends to make their way to the north side, where the explorers are to be picked up from the island in 3 days by the extraction team.
My best guess is we're scattered over a 4 to 5 mile radius. We should head north and join anyone we find.
Meanwhile, from another location, the colonel intends to move west with the surviving soldiers to rescue Chapman, the soldier who is thrown off the farthest and whose helicopter carries a certain precious cargo, which he must guard at the cost of his life. The colonel finds some more of his men, and one of them hands him the dog tags of their fallen comrades. Randa ends up alongside Packard, and the military man forces the guy at gunpoint to reveal the truth about his intentions in the expedition. It turns out that the explosives were dropped to lure Kong out. The first time Bill encountered monsters was 30 years ago, and he was the only survivor of the entire crew of the research vessel. Yet that time, no one believed his story. That's why he founded the Monarch Agency, which hunts for giant, unidentified creatures. And this expedition is a huge step in confirming his theory about the existence of monsters. The scientist intends to bring evidence back from the island. Conrad's group advances north through the jungle. One of the soldiers tries to contact the other survivors by radio, but his attempts bring no success as there is no signal. Moving along the lake, the protagonists unexpectedly encounter another strange giant, an amphibious buffalo, which escapes without causing any harm to the uninvited guests. At this time, Packard and Bill's squad notices the legs of a giant predatory spider among the bamboo stalks. The soldiers shoot the monster that has crept up unnoticed and sever its limbs. The giant falls to the ground, and the colonel mercilessly executes yet another enemy. Conrad and Mason's group discover ancient structures in the jungle. The girl looks around through the camera lens looking for the perfect shot, and suddenly notices a pair of eyes. From all directions, the armed, silent natives emerge, ready to pounce on the intruders at any moment. Suddenly, a stranger from an apparently civilized society saves the group from death.
No need for that. Come on now. Everybody keep your wigs on now.
Bewildered by this encounter, the stranger tells them that he has been on this island for almost 29 years. 8 times he had tried to return to the outside world on his own, and finally, a rescue came to him. The man turns out to be none other than Lieutenant Hank Marlowe, who was wrecked on the island during the combat operations of 1944. The seasoned islander offers to take the group to safety. At this time, Chapman, separated from the others, sees a terrifying scene. Before his eyes, the giant Kong, who has come to a hideaway to heal his wounds, fights an underwater monster, which attacked him from the deep waters of the bay. After defeating the cephalopod, Kong eats its tentacles for dinner. Hank leads the group to the village of the natives, with whom he has been living all these years. He shows the explorers the tribe's sacred site, where they built an altar of worship to Kong. It turns out that the giant ape protects the humans from the other terrifying creatures that inhabit the island, and the people honor their last defender and ruler of the island. Hank also recounts the story of the soldier who had crashed with him. He wasn't killed by Kong, but by a subterranean demon, Skullcrawler. A pack of these creatures was awakened by the series of explosions set off by the squad, which is why Kong was so angry at the uninvited guests. For now, there are only small offspring on the surface whom the giant can defeat. However, the supreme demon is larger than Kong himself and will destroy all life if it gets to the surface. Conrad invites Hank to leave with them when the extraction team arrives, but Hank states that the northern part of the island cannot be reached by foot. The man suggests that they use the boat he has been building using the spare parts from the fallen planes to get to the outside world all these years. However, the boat is not operational yet, and the crew sets out to repair it, while Mason takes some unique shots. The girl suddenly hears a desperate animal cry. She goes to the sound and finds a giant buffalo injured by the helicopter crash. Mason makes an unsuccessful attempt to free the poor animal from the death trap, when suddenly the giant Kong comes to her aid. He then leaves without harming the girl. The soldiers, along with the colonel meanwhile, find the giant's blood trail. Obsessed with killing the enemy, Packard aims to get to the crash site of Chapman's helicopter. It turns out that there are explosives on board, which he plans to use to finish off the monster. Early in the morning, 48 hours before the extraction, Conrad's group takes the boat north. Hank tells them that he got married before he left for the war, and the day before he was deployed to the island, he received a telegram about the birth of his son. Now he's not even sure if his family is still waiting for him in the outside world. The soldier with the radio finally manages to get a signal and contact the colonel. Packard and his squad turn out to be 2 kilometers to the north, and Conrad plans to pick them up. The group docks at the shore, and soon the soldiers arrive at the rendezvous point. The Pathfinder informs Packard of the plan to move north to where the rescue group will arrive, but the military man insists on moving west to save the lost soldier. Despite Hank's desperate warnings about the Skullcrawlers, Conrad reluctantly agrees to the colonel's plan. After a short rest, the group heads west. On the way, they find an ancient graveyard with the remains of Kong's parents. Under the colonel's pressure, the group moves forward. The gloomy burial valley envelops them in a green mist of methane. and one of the smoking soldiers triggers an explosion. It instantly attracts the attention of a hideous monster, which spews out the skull of the dead Chapman, along with his dog tags before Conrad's eyes. The skullcrawler disappears from view. The group continues to move forward and gets trapped by the bloodthirsty monster. Bill, who's taking photos to prove he was right, becomes its first victim. The squad fights desperately, and a flamethrower helps defeat the monster. But a flock of winged creatures arrive to back it up. A deafening methane explosion from the lighter, thrown by Mason, finally knocks the skullcrawler to the ground. Hank is trying to convince the colonel to turn back.
Now we're on their turf, and we need to turn back. Toot sweet!
But the stern military man incessantly talks about saving the soldier. In response, Conrad shows him the dog tags of the deceased Chapman, so the colonel is forced to reveal the real reason why he wanted to go to the crashed helicopter. Packard intends to take the explosives from the chopper to destroy Kong and win this war. A conflict breaks out, and the colonel refuses to believe that Kong is the defender of the island. Realizing that the madman cannot be stopped, Conrad suggests that he and his soldiers go westward, while the others return to the boat and wait for them there. The colonel agrees, takes his soldiers, and heads out. Soon the squad finds the helicopter with ammunition, and by nightfall, a trap for Kong consisting of shells and napalm is in place. With the first deafening explosions, Packard lures his prey into the trap. Just as the colonel expects, the giant Kong appears on the shore of the bay. The enraged master of the island rushes towards his adversaries, at which point Packard hurls a burning torch into the bay, where his soldiers have emptied their barrels of fuel. The surface of the water bursts into flames, enveloping the giant in deadly fire. Kong, however, manages to escape the fire. He has enough strength to destroy several enemies, but then collapses, exhausted at the feet of the colonel, who commands his men to prepare shells for a detonation. At that moment, Conrad's team arrives to rescue Kong. They could not leave the giant in trouble, and now, thanks to one of the soldiers defecting to the side of the heroes, they manage to stop the deranged Packard. Yet another danger immediately arises. From the deep waters of the bay, the giant skullcrawler rises to the surface. Everyone rushes to flee, except the colonel, who accepts his death with dignity. The survivors of the horrible encounter rush to reach the boat, with the monster relentlessly chasing after them, when suddenly, Kong enters the battle to save the people and distracts the furious monster. Exhausted from the battle, the giant can hardly resist powerful blows, and the skullcrawler manages to throw him back to an abandoned ship, where Kong gets trapped, entangled in the anchor chain. Brooks arrives with fire support, and while he's distracting the beast, Mason takes a well-aimed shot and wounds the monster with a flare gun. The coordinated action gives the giant time to get out of the trap. Kong again pounces on the enemy and destroys the monster by ripping its throat open. After making sure the humans are safe, the giant walks away. The few survivors of the expedition head north to the extraction point and make a promise to each other not to reveal the secrets of the Lost Island, even at the cost of a Pulitzer Prize. The helicopters carry the explorers back to their lives, and even Hank Marlowe, who has been gone for so many years, regains his family. As always, you'll find the name of the movie in the video description. Meanwhile, let us know in the comments, who would you bet on in the Kong vs. Godzilla fight? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next awesome retelling.